Welcome to Politicking. I'm Larry King. We start the program with the former Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul, an old friend. He joins us from Clute, Texas, where he does his shows for the recently launched Ron Paul channel on the internet. And he's the father of the current United States Senator and possible presidential candidate Rand Paul. Ron, before I ask you about your new program and everything attested to it, are you in the Republican Party? Politico says that you've got a détente with the party and you're closer now. Is that true?
Well, I haven't paid much attention to that. I haven't been involved. I've never been too interested in politics in spite of the fact I spent so many years there. But partisan politics sort of turns me off. But they haven't really talked to me. I haven't talked with them. And this détente, I have no idea what they're talking about, because I talked to some people who want to emphasize the Big Tent, and others are still unhappy about the way they were treated, if they were supporters of mine, how they were treated before. So from my viewpoint, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to it, because I'm much more interested, as I have been for many years, on education, on monetary policy and foreign policy, and I don't think we get very far with the partisan bickering, and then intra-party bickering doesn't get me very excited either.
Will Rogers once said, I'm not the member of any organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Can that be said now about the Republican Party, that we can't get a beat on it? Where are they? What's the center, core?
Well, I don't see it as one party versus the other. I see the leadership of both parties being very closely aligned, and that the people and the independent-minded people as being separate from them. If you look at that Amash vote having to do with NSA and whether or not we should rein them in a little bit, leadership on both sides were very much in favor of, all the spying they want, leave them alone, that sort of thing. And yet there was a large number of people responding, Republicans and Democrats, in opposition to this. Most people are supposed to, they think, oh, the Republicans, they're the conservatives, they want to cut back spending. But we know that doesn't happen. So I think some of us just see things differently than either the two parties being something separate and really squabbling, or some of these fights within a party may have more philosophic content than really the fighting that goes on in a presidential race, especially after they nominate the two candidates. Deep down, policies are very, very similar, and the American people offered a whole lot. If you happen not to fall into the mainstream, if you happen to be, libertarian or belong to Green Party, they don't get a fair shake. They don't get the interviews, and so I think that that's why so many people are turned off.
Does that mean possibly, and since I was so involved with that it's possible for a modern-day Ross Perot to emerge?
I guess if you're a billionaire, you can. I don't think you can do it from the grassroots. I think that, and I remember when Ross Perot became a name, and I think you helped him along. You gave him a fair shot and allowed him on your program, which was, unusual. He didn't get, the other networks automatic, but he got along pretty well. But I think his money talked. I think it does make a difference if you have the money. But I don't think our system lends itself to that. If anybody comes to agreeing essentially with what I'm saying, that the parties aren't a whole lot different, we don't have much of a democratic process left. We go overseas saying, you're going to be good Democrats and you're going to have elections. And if you don't elect the right guy, we're not going to support him. At the same time, the competition here, getting on ballots and getting credibility and getting in debates, it's really pretty difficult, and the process continues. You really don't ever see any changes in Washington, and I think it's because basically the leadership of both parties, in spite of all their arguing, they argue over power, I grant you that, but they don't argue over the issues that I consider important.
Therefore, would you encourage, as a loving father, would you encourage your son to get into this mix or not?
Well, it's been a long time since I, give advice to my kids. I gave them a lot of advice as they were growing up, and Rand certainly was interested in economics and studied and read, a lot of the Austrian economists. But now it was sort of like medicine. I was delighted he went into medicine, became an ophthalmologist, and 3 of my kids are in medicine. And there are pros and cons about medicine, but neither my wife or I said, go medicine, this is the way to go. Same way with politics. It was never really discussed in politics whether he should go in and run for the Senate or not. That was a decision he made on his own.
Okay, the current chairman of the Republican National Committee, Rance Priebus, he wants to sort of have a problem with the GOP debates. There were so many the last time. He wants to ban NBC and CNN from carrying any of the debates because they're planning documentaries on Hillary. It sounds like a soap opera. What are your thoughts on presidential primary debates?
Well, I think they're fairly rigged, and I think they're designed. When I was doing fairly well in 2008, and we were doing well in New Hampshire, and the big debate, a day or two before the primary, and everybody knows New Hampshire's important. Well, Fox had the big debate. But just incidentally, for some reason, my name was struck from the list. So, those things happen. But as far as saying, look, if you do it this way, if you look like you're doing it for the purpose of building up Hillary and we don't like it and we want to boycott it, I think the boycott is a pretty good weapon. But then again, I am a suspect that they don't want so many debates. In spite of my mentioning the fact that I was excluded at times, I still got in a lot of debates. CNN allowed me on in their debates. So, and that was helpful. Not that our supporters thought that we really were treated fairly all the time, but it was also a chance for me to talk about issues which really put the spotlight on liberty, the issue of individual liberty rather than big government doing everything. So it did offer some benefits, but now I think the Republicans are talking about, well, there's way too many. Well, it may be that when there were 26 in a year and I got to be in 24 of them, that was a benefit. But if they say, oh, we're only going to have four, and we're going to, they complain about too many candidates. Well, who's going to pick them if you don't have access to them? So it's far from perfect.
I'm talking to former Congressman and presidential candidate Ron Paul. We'll be back right after this. Did you ever feel, Doctor, and your long and tough fights, and you had a tremendous minority following, that you were tilting at windmills?
Never. I always prepared myself, probably psychological protection, that I never expected very much. Somebody said, weren't you always frustrated? I said, no, I was never frustrated in Washington. I just had low expectations. I never thought I'd go to Congress, but my issues were big. I'm challenged to the status quo of Republicans and Democrats. I want to change the foreign policy. I want to change the Federal Reserve System. I want a balanced budget. So, no, I didn't expect much to happen. The fact that in these last 5 years, especially going through the first and second presidential campaigns in 8 and 12, the attention given was far above anything I expected. I never dreamed there'd be a day when the House of Representatives would pass twice a bill that says that we ought to audit the Federal Reserve System. And even the Republican Party was forced to acknowledge that in the last campaign, not because they cared, but they knew that it was politically beneficial for Romney to at least say something and put something in the platform. So I say that's where the change has to be. It has to be with the people. Attitudes have to change, and that is where we're making great strides. So I always felt very good about what's happening, and of course I get criticized from both ends, that you didn't achieve as much and you were tilting at windmills, this sort of thing. But I can't say personally that I've been disappointed with it, and right now it's led to this opportunity where I can still talk about the issues. I think people's attitudes and minds and educational levels have everything to do with it. Governments reflect the people. When the people object, I believe government will change.
The head of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, recently described himself as a big admirer of yours. What did you think of that whole WikiLeaks operation, leaking names and the like? What was your reaction?
Well, I want as much transparency of government as possible, and I think WikiLeaks has worked very hard to make sure that nobody's been injured and there's no evidence that anybody has. But if our government is doing something wrong and they're hiding it from us, I think there is a moral obligation of those people who know it and can reveal that to us to let us know. They should tell us. But the government complains, oh no, they're going to release this information to the enemy. Well, I'm not the enemy. The people's not the enemy. The people ought to know what's going on. We ought to have our privacies protected and the secrecy of government challenged when it's totally unnecessary. And most of this is very unnecessary, all the spying that they do.
So what do you think of the Bradley Mannings and the Edward Snowdens?
Well, I think highly of them. I think of them like Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg, you know, was they tried to put him away for a long time in prison. They tried the New York Times for releasing the truth about how the Vietnam War was started, how we were lied into that war. And I think people now are trying to tell us the truth about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. They should be seen more as heroes, because you take a guy like Snowden, he knows exactly what he was up to, and he knows the danger of it. And but he believed, I sincerely believe, although I've never met him, that he was convinced that he was doing a service to the people by doing this, and we shouldn't be calling people like this traitors. I think we don't have enough whistleblowers, and we should pay more attention to our laws of whistleblowing, that when people tell us the truth, they shouldn't be called traitors. But this is characteristic of an empire. You know, if treason in an empire is when you tell the truth. If you tell a lie, that supports the empire. And we live in an age where the empire depends on a lot of lies, and we need to expose the lies. And so I compliment them for doing it.
We'll be right back with more Ron Paul. We'll talk about the Ron Paul channel. Still coming later in the show, the man he just mentioned, the original government leaker, Daniel Ellsberg. Don't go away. We're back with Ron Paul. A couple of other things I want to get into. What do you make of the dispute going on between your son and the governor of New Jersey?
I think it's unnecessary, and I don't think that much positive will come. But in a way, though, you could argue there is a philosophic difference there. Of course, you know, this argument whether you should have big government or small government, I think is a legitimate argument, and I don't think people should be elected and in compromise to be elected. You know, Grover Cleveland had a great quote once. He says, "What is it worth if you're elected and re-elected and you don't stand for anything?" So now, the argument is get elected first. Get elected. Say what you have to say. Bring people together. You know, do whatever's necessary to get elected, because if you don't get elected, you can't do any good. Well, I don't buy into that. I think you have to believe in something. And just getting elected, if you don't believe anything, you'll end up having a government like we have today. That's what they do all the time. As soon as they're elected, they're worrying about the next election. So I want people to believe in something, and I want the people to know what it is, and then have a fair and square election over it.
What is the Ron Paul channel?
Well, this is something we're doing on the internet. It's an outgrowth of what I've been doing, and over the years I've always had some vehicle, as far back as 1974, in and out of politics. But you know, during the campaign, we had tremendous support coming from young people who were very savvy with the internet, a lot more so than I. They would raise money and organize spontaneously because they liked the message, and that excited me. And the excitement remained, and I was ready to get out of Congress, and several groups came to me and said, "Why don't you do something on the internet?" And I said, "Well, I don't know a whole lot about it." So I finally, you know, got some people together that I thought were capable and understood it. So they gave me this proposal about a channel where I could do what I'm doing right now, talking about the issues. And this is why we've done this, and it's a channel that hopefully I can do interviews. I'll never be an interviewer as good as Larry King, but you know, I'll take a stab at it and you know, interview people. And also I'll be taking calls and emails from supporters and interact that way. So it's my effort really to promote something I deeply believe in. I believe it's the right thing, and I believe it's beneficial to our country. I believe that liberty does answer a lot of our questions, and I want to keep doing it because I'm firmly convinced it's the American tradition. It was the tradition and most of the understanding of the founders, and I don't know if I do it for a couple reasons. One, I believe that's how you can have peace and prosperity. So nobody should ever challenge that and say, well, I think most people do want peace and prosperity, but look at what we have today. There's not a whole lot of peace around the world, and we're engaged in 130-some country, and right now the prosperity in this country is very precarious. The middle class is shrinking, the very wealthy is growing in numbers, and we are still not out of trouble yet. Matter of fact, our problems economically are getting worse, and those are the kind of things I want to talk about, and I do that on the channel.
And when does it kick off?
Last week we had our first program, so it's available now. Anybody interested, go to ronpaulchannel.com and they can get the information.
There you have it. Just go to ronpaulchannel.com and you'll find out everything. A couple of other quick things. Who should be the next chairman of the Federal Reserve?
Mr. Nota, N-O-T-A, none of the above. I can't pick anybody. You know, they say there's only two choices up there, but they both believe that if the government spends too much money and they can't borrow enough, the Fed is always there to print the money. That is a failed policy, and and they both endorse this. So they both support. What if we spend hundreds of billions of dollars overseas doing things that we shouldn't do? Well, the Fed is going to take care of it because there's not enough people to pay all the taxes. So they essentially believe that you have to have somebody with a printing press that is the lender of last resort. Otherwise, the banks who overextend themselves and get into trouble, they could go bankrupt. And you don't want that to happen. That would be disruptive. So you always have to. So you have the Federal Reserve to serve these interests. So the individual there is not important. We lived up in this country up until 1913 without a central bank, and we had economic growth that surpassed anything since then. So I just don't think we need it. So picking one over the other doesn't really do much good.
Thank you, Ron. And don't forget the Ron Paul channel. Just go to ronpaulchannel.com and pick it up on the web, right?
That is it.
Always good seeing you, Ron. It's always a pleasure talking with you and asking you questions.
Thank you, Larry.